This week's project has a lot in it. Please stay tuned for this video. I'm turning a enclosed vessel, one of the first ones on my channel. I'm using my DIY Hollowing Jig, which I manufactured myself, so please stay tuned to see how that was done. As well as, in the end, this vase is going to be sent to a local artist to be painted, and hopefully you'll agree that the end results are something beautiful. This week is going to be an exciting video. I'm going to turn a vase. I have a glued up block here of 2-inch stock that's going to give me a 6-inch in diameter vase and 10 inches long. I don't normally do vases. You're going to see why I don't in a minute. This video is also going to feature my hollowing jig, which I've manufactured from some designs I've seen on the internet. The other thing about this video is it is a vase, and when I'm done with the vase, I'm going to be sending it to a local artist, very talented artist, to embellish and paint on it. I think this video has a lot in it that will appeal to a large number of people, so please stay tuned and thank you for watching. When I first start rounding this up, because it is square, I'm only hitting the very outside corners, and you can see here that I'm getting very small shavings. I'm now going to switch to my roughing gouge, which does a much better job, and as I get more round, you can see the shavings coming off of this are very large, and it's doing a really good job at quickly removing a lot of material, because at this point my goal is to just get it round, and then I'll start worrying about the surface and the shaping of it. Now that I've got it round, I'm switching back to my 5/8 bowl gouge, again my go-to tool, and because it's already round at this point, all I'm doing is a nice push cut to give me a much smoother surface. I want you to notice the shavings on my sleeve, and also here you see how fine they are. Notice the difference now that it's been sharpened up. You can see now the shavings are coming off much faster, much larger, coarser shavings, but yet I'm still getting a very smooth surface. Someone asked me just the other day how often I sharpen my tools, and that depends. I sharpen them when it needs it, and I know it needs it when it starts to cut hard and the shavings get small. But quite often I will stop and resharpen my tool a couple times during a turning. So in this case, I'd sharpened when I started, and this was my second time that I've sharpened this tool while doing this project so far. Much smoother surface and much larger shavings coming off. So this vase is going to be tapered. The fattest part is going to be right here. It's going to have a taper down to the top and a taper down to the bottom. I am round now, so I don't need to make it any smaller in diameter. That's just to give me an estimate. I may refine the shape a little bit more as I go. As I mentioned, I have an idea in my head of the shape on which I want for this vase. I want it to be fat, is between those two pencil marks, tapered up at the top, and then a more gradual taper down to the bottom. Now, I may change this as I go. I often, once I start turning and refining the shape, I may find that I want to change it, but at this point, that's what I have in mind. I'm happy with the bottom diameter now. I just have to make sure that it's big enough that it won't be top heavy. And now I'll just work at making this between, basically connecting the dots between that pencil line and the bottom, just making sure that that's smooth. And I'll do that with my scraper. That's probably the best tool to smooth it out, remove any of those ridges, and make sure that I've got a nice even transition. You saw me there resting the tool on the top of the vase. All I'm doing there is just making sure that I'm level, because as I travel up and down the tool rest, it is easy to get waves in the surface. So I'm just making sure that that I do not have any waves and that it's got a nice profile from that middle section right to the base. Now I'm using my negative rake scraper, and the process is you use your gouge to shape it, then you use your scraper to remove any fine ridges before sanding. You're seeing the same thing that I am. You're seeing fine lines, and as I pass the scraper up and down, you're seeing that they're disappearing. Once I've scraped enough that I don't feel any lines, then I switch to sanding. Here I'm just using paper with a block. A block allows me to cover a larger surface area, which works well in this case because I'm dealing with a large flat surface. I don't want to introduce any waves with the paper. I'm just going to flatten the very top of the vase because I'm going to glue a decorative rim on the top of this. So I've got a piece of Purple Heart that I'm going to put on the top. So once I've got it flat, then I hollow out the very center because I'm going to open that up anyways, and I don't want that to interfere with the piece that I'm gluing on. I stand corrected. A moment ago, I was holding a piece of mahogany against the top, and I've since switched to Purple Heart, and that's what's glued on here. Then I glued it on just as a square block, and then I will turn it round with it on top of the vase, which is what I'm doing here now. Now that it's round, I'm just refining the shape of it a little bit more with my carbide tool, and also cleaning up the interface between the ring that I glued on and the top of the vase. Now I'm just refining, again, that interface in the very top of the vase with some sandpaper before switching to the inside. With this, I just find it easier to use sheet paper than I do with my power sander because of the curved shape. I don't know that I've shown this on my channel very much. I don't use it that often, but it's steady rest. This vase is 9 inches from my chuck. So that's a lot of pressure on that chuck if I was just holding with my chuck. I've got to work the inside right here, so I can't keep my tailstock because I'm going to go in here and hollow out the inside. So I'm using this steady rest, which is a homemade device, a plywood ring that has a bolting mechanism to the frame of my bed of my lathe, rollerblade wheels here in the 3 places, adjustable here. So you put that up against your work as tight as you can, and then that holds it so that it can't tip up or down, and it takes pressure off of the chuck. So here's a close-up of the steady rest, and you can see I've put some masking tape on it. That's just so that the rollerblade wheels won't make a mark on the surface. Earlier, the audio got cut off a little bit, but you can see here the intent of the steady rest is to take pressure off that tenon, because if this vase were to lift up or down, that would put tremendous pressure and potentially break that tenon. So here I am hollowing the inside of my vase out. Because of the larger opening size, I was fortunate that I was able to use a Forstner bit and drill out the inside of it, at least a starting hole. It's certainly, I don't want to leave it like that. That would make it very, very thick. I am going to go back with a hollowing jig and take out the rest of the inside, but this is just a starting point. The Forstner bit is in my tailstock and the piece is turning, the Forstner bit does not, and then I just use my tailstock to advance the bit into the wood. So here is my hollowing jig. You can't see it all right now in the camera, but I'll show you in a second. So I've got a carbide cutting bit that goes inside this rod. I also have a swan neck rod, which also accepts this same cutter in there, and it's being held in place. Eventually it'll be a set screw. I couldn't find any this morning, so I just put in a M6 bolt. But let me put this inside so that you can see the rest of it. So I have an articulating arm. I'm going to move my camera. I have an articulating arm here, and it is attached to my tailstock. So it just slides onto my tailstock, and I have an articulating arm. It's supported on the tool rest, and I've got really good range of motion with this, very good control over the whole thing. And again, I've got a carbide cutter inside this hollow vessel. I also have a laser pointer which will mount on here and will tell me how thick the wall is, and I'll show you that in a minute. I'm going to do a bit of hollowing without it just because I don't need it right now, but I will put that in and then I'll show you what that looks like. So here's the hollowing rig. You can see it quite clearly here now. In order to move it in and out, I hold onto the cutter shaft. I can also hold onto the articulating arm, as you see here. And it allows me, with this carbide cutter, to plunge in fairly well. In this case, as you remember, I did drill it out, but even so, I'm able to cut the walls, and it cuts well. You can see here in this video, even after just a few seconds, the amount of material that I ended up removing. Now you may be wondering why I need a hollowing jig. Now this vessel, it's called a closed vessel just because the opening is smaller than the maximum diameter. I could do some of this with traditional tools, but with a vessel that's got a smaller opening, that would be much more difficult to do. The other thing is, because this is deep, this is 9 inches tall, there's no way I could use a standard tool and go that far into the vessel. So this hollowing jig allows me to do that. The other thing it does, which I don't have here, but when I get my laser pointer installed, and I'll show that in subsequent videos, it will allow me to check the thickness of the walls. You're going to see here in a minute that on this vessel I don't need it, but normally I would. So if you want to do deep vessels, this hollowing jig, a hollowing jig, is the only way you can do that. Anytime you get a traditional tool extended out over the tool rest more than 50% of the length of the tool, you're going to run into problems. The other thing is, it's very difficult to see what you're doing once you get inside a closed vessel. If that cutter dips below the center line, you are going to get a catch. So again, with traditional tools, that's difficult to control. With this cutter, it's not possible for it to dip below center line. Again, because of the larger opening on this hollow vessel, I am able to use my traditional thickness measuring tool. You can see here by the spacing that's showing up in my hand, which reflects the actual wall thickness, it's pretty uniform all the way down. Right there, there is maybe a little bit of a ridge or a catch, but it's not until I get to the very, very bottom that the wall thickness gets a bit thicker. Here I'm just sanding with paper, and I do not have my tailstock engaged nor the steady rest, but I'm just using sheet paper, and I'm not putting a lot of pressure on it, and I can support it with my hand underneath. The other thing I'm doing here is I've already sanded up through the finer grits, and now I just take a bit of sawdust and I burnish the surface of the wood itself. It just helps polish it a little bit better. Here you can see I've turned a small cone that will fit inside the vase, and that just allows me to hold it with just a friction fit as I bring up my tailstock and allow me to clean up and remove the tenon that's on the bottom of this vase. Now I do have a center hole there from before, so I know where to line that up too. And that allows for a pretty accurate remount. For the final removal of the tenon, I did end up putting a little more pressure on the vase itself, so I did mount it in with my steady rest, just as extra security. Here you can see the small nub that's left over. I'll just take a chisel and some sandpaper and clean that up. Once that's done, I'm going to work on a decorative piece that's going on the bottom of the vase as well. That's also going to be Purple Heart. I will mention here, you may notice that the Purple Heart, as I work it, looks quite brown, and it is. But once you finish sanding it and working it, if you put that out in the sun, it will go very, very purple after that. It's just as you work it, it does turn brown. So here's the final product as far as the work that I've done. I've finished this vase. I put sanding sealer on it so that the artist could use acrylic paints over top of it. And at this point, it's ready for her to begin her work. So here's the beginning of the painting. The flowers and the stems are starting to take shape. And here's the final product with all the background painted as well, gold accents on the stems, and I'm very pleased with the way this turned out. I'd like to thank the artist, Svetlana, for doing this, and again, I think it turned out very well.